Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen.
Honorables Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres,
Honorable Ministers,
la vice-présidente de la Commission
distinguished
de
Deputy
l'Union
Chairperson of the
africaine,
African Union
Madame
Commission,
Monique
Dr. Monique Zanza Bagonna, distinguished commissioners of the African Union, distinguished members of the panel of eminent Africans, Your Excellencies, honorable ambassadors, dear audience and televiewers on the various television channels on the continent. All of you who are actually following this debate on the various platforms, my name is, I come from the Algerian National Television, and it's really an honor for me to be moderating the Majadala Africa. And we are actually going live from the African Union Commission headquarters here in Addis Ababa in the Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, with, of course, the potential candidate vying for the chairmanship of the Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be moderating in French, and I am pleased to say that I'll be sharing this platform with my dear sister from Ghana, Anita Eskin. Good evening, Anita.
Gentlemen, honorable ministers, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Her Excellency Monique Nzabaganwa, African Union commissioners, members of the panel of eminent Africans, excellencies, ambassadors, and our esteemed audience, both here in person and live across all 55 member states of the African Union. We have immense pleasure to come to you live from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa specifically, where we are here from the African Union headquarters, bringing you what we call a historic moment. 3 esteemed candidates, each vying for the position of chairperson of the African Union, will debate tonight in front of the world, and indeed, historic it is.
Mesdames et Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, during the Manjadala debate, it is going to last 2 hours, and we're going to be live, and we are going to introduce the various candidates for the post of chairmanship, and then we are going to discuss several burning issues on the African continent, and they will be answering several questions that have actually been prepared by an independent panel, so that at the end of the day, you Africans will get to know what the vision of these 3 candidates are for this continent. We want to see this continent taken forward, and so for each candidate, we're going to have 5 minutes. 5 minutes that will be respected by each of the 3 candidates. And so, first of all, the candidates would have 5 minutes each to present themselves, introduce themselves, and give us their vision statement for the African Union Commission. And they will tell us how they expect us to see the African Union carry out or meet their aspirations. And later on, we will take up the questions in this debate. 4 minutes will be given to each candidate to address all the questions. And at the end, each candidate will have 2 candidates for their closing statements.
Africa Leadership Debate, we'll see our 3 esteemed candidates before you, basically sharing their ideas and their ambitions as far as the aspirations of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, are concerned. And ladies and gentlemen, the rules are very simple. Each one of our candidates will have an opportunity to present themselves, of course, and their ambition as well, and they will make these presentations for all of 5 minutes each. Afterwards, we go into the first round of questions, second, third, and fourth round of questions. Each candidate has 4 minutes to answer the questions in each of these rounds. And now, ladies and gentlemen, at the end, we have a 2-minute closing remark from each one of our candidates. Now that you understand why you're here and the rules have been set before you, also to mention that the questions you will be hearing tonight, the questions our esteemed candidates will be receiving, are questions created by a completely independent panel in order to promote peace, fairness, and transparency among us all. Ladies and gentlemen, with that established, allow me to welcome to the stage Ambassador Konjit, who is the chair of the African Union's panel of eminent Africans and the host of our gathering here tonight, to share the significance of the election process of the African Union. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Konjit.
Mesdames et messieurs, on est ravis
Ladies
à
and
présent
gentlemen, we are now very pleased to call on Her Excellency Ambassador Konjit Sine Georges. She is going to give us her opening remarks.
Excellencies, candidates for the post of chairmanship of the African Commission, Excellencies, ambassadors, fellow Africans, ladies and gentlemen. Heartfelt greetings to our live audience here at the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa and all African citizens watching this debate. On behalf of the panel of eminent Africans, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 Mujadala Africa Leadership Debate. Tonight's event represents a critical milestone in our collective journey towards achieving the Africa we want under Agenda 2063. I must say, now more than ever before, we need a united Africa and an effective AU Commission. The world we live in is at a crossroads with many complex situations. This continent of ours has gone through numerous challenges in its history. Its people have paid huge sacrifice to be where we are today. The trajectory of going out of colonial legacy to move to the Africa we want stands as testimony. We understand that our dreams and aspirations will not take us anywhere unless we come together. I had the immense pleasure as a young cadet of having seen the birth of the organization, the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, and followed its transformation to the African Union. I have seen their highs and lows. But one thing is for sure, if the African Union had not existed, we would have had to invent it. We have a long way to go to reach the Africa we want by 2063. The African Union Commission, our only vehicle to take us to our destination, has to be strong and fit for the purpose. We have to face together our current and future challenges, narrow inequalities, build more just and inclusive societies, resolve conflicts, in short, provide to our citizens what they are expecting. It has become more and more clear that the African Union has a rightful place on the global stage. It has become a partner that can't be easily pushed aside. We are claiming our place where decisions are made regarding our continent. Africa is coming out of age. This evening, the three candidates to the post of the chairpersonship of the African Union Commission are going to participate in a debate. I regret that the fact that our continent couldn't also have a female candidate and place the AU, the African Union Commission, on the right side of history. This is a serious homework we have to take into consideration. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the greatest honor and privilege to thank the general public for participating and for their interest in this process by sending questions. I would also like them to know that the concerns expressed by the public are taken care of in the questions. And now, ladies and gentlemen and excellencies, I have the duty and the honor to hand over to the moderators the questions sealed envelope. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much, Excellency Kanji Senior Judges. Dear participants, what we're going to see here, what Madam Kanji Senior Judges is going to do now, is to actually give to us an envelope that contains all the questions that we are going to ask. That is, either Anita or me will be asking the potential candidates who are vying for the position of the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Fatima has outlined, Her Excellency the Ambassador has handed over the questions that have been curated by an independent panel. As we mentioned, there will be 4 rounds, and here in my hand we have 4 envelopes sealed, and these envelopes will only be opened at the forefront of each one of the rounds.
Merci infiniment, Anita.
Thank you very much, Anita. Ladies and gentlemen, at the moment, we are going to introduce the various candidates vying for the position of chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency Mahamadou Ali Yusuf, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Djibouti. Your Excellency, His Excellency Mr. Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya, and the third candidate will be His Excellency Richard James, the former Foreign Minister of Madagascar.
It is with pride and honor that we invite our 3 esteemed candidates to now take their position on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of welcoming His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Foreign Affairs Minister, Djibouti. Also joining us will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister, Kenya. And we have His Excellency Richard J. Randiamandrato, who is from Madagascar. Ladies and gentlemen, with humility, I ask that you give them another round of applause. These are our candidates for the chairperson position of the African Union.
Messieurs, bonsoir et merci d'être parmi nous.
Good evening, honorable gentlemen. You're welcome to this event, and you're all live on this debate. Millions of Africans are watching the Njandala debate. And like we said earlier on, each of you would have 5 minutes to introduce yourself. So we are going to start with you, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf of Djibouti. Honorable Raila Odinga, Honorable Richard James, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, ladies and gentlemen, African citizens, good evening.
Je m'appelle Mahmoud
My
Ali
name
Youssouf.
is Mahmoud
J'ai
Ali Yusuf.
59 ans,
I am 59 years
marié,
old.
père de 8
I'm married with
ministre des
8
Affaires étrangères
children.
de mon pays
Minister of
depuis
Foreign
20 ans.
Affairs of Djibouti for the past 20 years.
Je me tiens devant vous ce soir
And I am
pour vous
standing
exposer
before you this
succinctement
evening to give you
ma vision et les ambitions que je porte pour
a
notre
brief
continent.
presentation of my vision for Africa's
L'Afrique se
future.
trouve à une étape cruciale de son
Africa is
évolution.
at a crossroads of its
Certes,
evolution.
en retard
Of
par
course,
rapport aux
it
autres
is
continents,
actually
en
lagging
matière
behind
d'intégration,
other
de paix et
continents
de
in terms of
sécurité
peace and
et de
security,
développement
integration,
socio-économique.
and socioeconomic
Mais l'Afrique
development.
avance.
But Africa is
L'Afrique
moving forward.
s'organise.
Africa
Et
is
l'Afrique
getting
se
itself
positionne
organized,
sur la scène
and Africa is doing its level
internationale.
best to be on the international
L'Afrique que nous
stage.
voulons
The
intégrer,
Africa that we
pacifique et
want, an
prospère,
integrated,
c'est
peaceful,
d'abord le
and
choix de nos
prosperous
peuples
one, is
avant
first the
d'être le
choice of
choix
our
de nos
people
dirigeants.
before the choice of its
Les
leaders.
pères fondateurs de
The
l'OUA
founding
en
fathers of the
1963
OAU in 1963
à nos dirigeants d'aujourd'hui
and
qui ont
to our
institué
leaders
l'Union
today
africaine
who actually
il y a
established the
plus de
African
20 ans,
Union more than 20
jusqu'aux
years,
citoyens lambda,
all
le
the way down
panafricanisme
to
est ce qui nous
the
rassemble et
average
consolide notre
citizen,
diversité.
we are trying to
Et ciment
consolidate
l'unité
our
du continent.
diversity and to cement
En
the unity of
adoptant
the
l'agenda
continent.
2063
As we
et en
adopted
posant les
Agenda
jalons des 5 grands défis
2063 and
pour réaliser
also
ces objectifs, l'Union
the
africaine s'est
five
donné la
plans,
feuille de
the
route
African Union
pour y
actually
arriver.
has a
La
roadmap
position de l'Union
to
africaine a la responsabilité
achieve
d'orienter,
its goals.
de
And the
coordonner,
African Union
de
is
mettre à
supposed to
exécution les
coordinate
décisions des
and also
organes
to implement
décideurs.
the decisions of the
Si je
policy
suis élu à la
organs.
tête de la
And if I am
Commission,
elected as
je m'engage
chairperson
à
of the
rehausser le niveau
commission,
de performance et de
actually
mise en œuvre de nos
I
actions
am going
communes,
to make sure that we work
estimées seulement
together
à 37%
and
annuels
we
dans
actually
un plan
have to go
décennal
beyond the
2013-2024.
37%
En
of the
matière de
work
paix
that
et de
we have done so
sécurité, la
far. In terms
prévention
of
et
peace
l'alerte
and
rapide
security and early
à travers le
warnings,
système
through
continental d'alerte
the
rapide fera
continental
l'objet
early
d'un
warning system,
renforcement
we
concerté.
are going
Le
to
Conseil de paix et de sécurité
strengthen
devra
the
être
peace and
plus
security
proactif
council,
pour
which
que
has
les
to be
États
more
membres
proactive,
en
and
portent
the
les
member states
responsabilités
will also
atteignable.
have to be
Le comité des sages
responsible.
devra
The
obtenir les
panel of the
moyens de
wilds would
continuer
be given the
efficacement
means
son travail
to
de
work
médiation.
to continue
J'agirai
its
de sorte que les
mediation work.
ressources
And I will
nécessaires
do
soient
my level best to
mobilisées
make sure that
afin de rendre
resources
réellement
are
opérationnel
mobilized to
les
make
forces en attente et je
the
plaiderai pour une
African
flexibilité dans
standby force
l'utilisation des
operational.
ressources du Fonds de la
And we
paix.
can also use the
Je
African Peace
poursuivrai
Fund.
avec les
And
instances compétentes
with the
des
relevant
réformes
bodies,
non mises
I
en
am going to
application à ce jour.
continue or
Je
to
travaillerai à
carry out the
mobiliser
reforms
et
which have not been
diversifier les sources
implemented
de
today.
financement
And I'm going
pour
to
les programmes de l'Union.
diversify our
Et je m'attellerai
financing,
à la tâche
and
d'autonomiser
I will do my
financièrement
best
l'Union
to
africaine.
make sure that African Union has
L'intégration
its
passe par le
own
commerce
financing sources.
et le commerce
And
intra-africain doit aller
I'm
au-delà
also
des
going to boost
18%
intra-African
certifiés à ce jour.
trade, which
Je
should go
travaillerai à la
beyond
levée des
80%.
barrières non
And I will
tarifaires
bring down all the
pour
non-tariff
faciliter la
barriers
libre
and
circulation des
facilitate the
biens et
free
des
movement of
personnes.
goods and persons
La
across
place
the
de l'Afrique
continent.
sur la scène
The place of
internationale
Africa on the
sera
international
l'une de mes
stage will
priorités.
be one of my
Je
greatest
serai
priorities.
la voix
And I'm going
écoutée
to
de
be the
l'Afrique
voice
à travers
of
le
the
monde.
African people across the
La
world.
transformation de notre
The
continent se
transformation of
fera
our
avec
continent
notre
will be
jeunesse
done with our
et nos
youth
femmes
and our
et
women,
notre
of course,
diaspora
and the diaspora
par les
too,
moyens du savoir,
through
des techniques et
knowledge,
des technologies en
technology
agriculture,
in
en
agriculture,
industrie
in
et dans les
industry,
services.
and in the service sector.
L'Afrique que nous voulons,
The
mesdames et
Africa that
messieurs,
we want, ladies
est
and
l'Afrique de la
gentlemen,
paix,
is an
de
Africa of
l'intégration
peace,
et de
integration,
la prospérité
and
passe d'abord par la
prosperity.
volonté
And this
politique
has to go
des
through
États,
the
par la
political will
solidarité
and the
puissante
solidarity
africaine.
of the African
Grâce
people.
à
And
l'adhésion de nos
thanks
peuples.
to the
Devant vous ce
support
soir,
of our people.
devant des
And
millions
so as I
d'Africains,
stand in front of
je
you
prends
today
l'engagement
and in front of all
d'assurer la
the millions of
responsabilité qui
Africa,
me sera
I want to
confiée si
tell
je
you
suis
that
élu
if I'm
pour
given the
faire en
chance
sorte
of being the
que notre
chairperson of this
continent
commission, I will
brille
do my best to make sure that
sur la
our
scène
continent
internationale
shines
et je vous
on the
remercie.
international stage. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite His Excellency Raila Odinga to share his opening remarks. Your Excellency, you have 5 minutes.
صاحب المعالي أشكركم
Your Excellency Ambassador Konjit,
صاحبة السعادة السفيرة
my
كونجيت
co-panel is here, His Excellency
زميلي هنا صاحب
Mahmoud Ali
المعالي
Yusuf,
محمود علي يوسف
and His Excellency Mr. Richard, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Africa. Africa, hamjambo. Bonsoir. Salam alaikum rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuh. Boa noite. I am delighted to have opportunity today to stand before you as the son of Africa. I was born in Kenya, but I'm told that my grandparents came from the Sudan. I am a father of 4, a grandfather of 5, and a husband of 1 that I know of. I am an engineer by profession, and I have been an academic. I have also been a public servant. I've been a member of parliament. I've also been a prime minister and also leader of opposition. In those capacities, I've tried to do my best, and I've gained a lot of experience in terms of management of public affairs. I stand here as an Pan-Africanist and an Afro-optimist. 2 months ago, that is on the 21st of October, this year we were here in Addis Ababa. We had been invited as members of the families of the founding fathers of the African Union to come and witness the reopening of the Africa Hall. That's the hall where the OAU was launched in 1963. And we're happy to be here with Madam Ambassador Konjit, who was there as a young girl at that time. It is now 61 years since the launch of the Organization of African Unity. And at that time, if you read the speeches of the founding fathers on that day, they were very passionate, and all of them talked about African unity. Where there was a difference was, when do we achieve this unity? There are those who, under the school of thought, that the unity now. There are those who said, no, we need to be gradual in this. Let us first build the building blocks, the regional unions, which will eventually translate into formation of the African Union as a whole. But now we have they came up 50 years later with Vision 2063, which now hopes to get Africa united, one union government by 2030, and move on to attain the vision, the wishes of the founding fathers of Africa. I say that I have the experience. I've been part of this movement for changing the continent. You know that some achievements have been made. Africa is now completely liberated, but there's still work to do. And I believe that I have what it takes to get us where we want to do. In the field of education, in the field of health, in the field of value addition to the abundant wealth that we have on the continent, in the field of trade, inter-African trade. I have acted as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure. And in this, I know that we have very comprehensive programs in PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development of the continent. What remains is action. And what I want to promise the African people is that I am going to lead from the front to ensure that we achieve the visions of the founding fathers of our continent. I thank you.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much, the candidate from Kenya,
Odinga, et maintenant, mesdames et
Honorable
messieurs,
Raila Amolo Odinga.
présentation de son Excellence, Monsieur Richard.
Now we're going to listen to
Mandrato de
His
Madagascar.
Excellency Randra Mandrato from Madagascar.
Excellences et chers invités,
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة
Excellencies, distinguished guests, to this very important event for the African people. As you can see, we are three candidates, not two candidates, like you see on the social media. And we are standing in front of you today to convince you of how serious we are and how seriously we're going to work towards the African Union involvement. So who am I? I am one out of 1.2 billion Africans. Just like you, I started from very humble beginnings, from the very beginning. I was a young consultant. I was a researcher in microfinance sector, and I traveled across many African capitals, about 41 countries in the year 1989. Just like you, it was difficult for me to find a job, but I did find a job which was at the level of my capacity. And just like you, I actually built my career based on my conviction that each African citizen can actually survive. And just like you, today I am standing before you because I believe that I have the confidence and the trust of the president of Madagascar, and I am proud. I am proud that I was actually supported by my country. Just like you, I've actually come a long way, and I have actually gotten to this level where I have the trust of my government. I was Minister of the Economy in my country because um, that is my specialty. I was also Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I'm here today standing before you to talk about Africa. Africa is actually the second dynamic economic region in the world, and is actually making progress. And things are changing in our favor. And recently, I read about the funding of the African Development Bank funding several projects in Africa. And this is quite promising for the continent. The World Bank also has increased its envelope, funding 75 countries, 75 less developed countries. And I also think that we have funding for small states. Small states, that's not a pejorative term, but there is an idea that I want to share with you. Africa is moving, is first of all the states that are actually seeing a 3.4% in economic growth per year. But I think we should do more than that. And then we have our own house. Here we are, the African Union, which is our home. And what I have noticed is that there is an Africa which is actually moving forward, which is a dynamic Africa, and then there is the African Union, which doesn't really have the capacity for it to move forward. I am here before you today because I think it is indispensable and it is a must that those who want to have the quality, competence, conviction, of course, today, I think that I have those qualities, and I hope that I've been able to convince you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Richard Randiamandrato from Madagascar. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this officially brings us to the beginning of our debate, where we move into the first round of questions. But before then, allow us to reiterate the rules and the guidelines for you, our esteemed candidates. You each have 4 minutes to answer the questions that will be posed, and you will each answer the absolute same question. Your Excellencies, with respect and humility, if you surpass the 4-minute mark, myself or my colleague will have to interrupt your response. And this eventually brings us to this moment, ladies and gentlemen, where my colleague and I will open the envelope for the first round of questions.
Thank you, Anita. Merci
Thank you very
infiniment
much,
à nos chers
Anita, and
candidats qui
thank you very
viennent
much
de se
to our
présenter par vous,
candidates who have
mesdames
just
et messieurs,
introduced
honorables
themselves to yourselves,
assistants. Comme vient de le
members
rappeler ma
of
chère
this
consoeur
public. As
Anita
my sister has
Erskine,
just
eh bien,
reminded us,
tout de suite, nous allons
we are
ouvrir,
going
mesdames
to
et messieurs,
open,
le
ladies
premier round
and
de
gentlemen, the
questions.
first
Nous avons
round of
rappelé que
questions.
les
We are going
questions
to
ont été
remind
rédigées
all
en
of us that
langue
the questions
française et en
were
langue
drafted
anglaise.
in
Elles
English
ont
and in
été
French.
rédigées
They
par un
were
panel
drafted
indépendant.
by an
Les
independent
enveloppes vous
panel.
ont
The
été
envelopes
parvenues
were
tout à l'heure par
handed
son
over to
excellence,
us a few minutes
Madame
ago by Her
l'ambassadeur
Excellency Madam
Kojit
Konjit
Sine
Sine
et tout de suite avec
Georges. And
Anita,
immediately
nous allons
with
ouvrir une
Anita,
enveloppe.
we're going to
Anita,
select
vous
an
posez la
envelope.
première question.
Anita, you're going to ask the first question.
Esteemed candidates, your question in English, and after that, my colleague here, Fatima, will translate in French. Translating Africa's natural wealth into continental prosperity. Africa has everything it needs to feed her people, educate her children, and take care of her health. Yet, the reality defies this. How will you turn the continent's resource wealth into tangible benefits, reducing debt, ensuring sustainable financing for the African Union, and enabling Africa to control its destiny economically? Also, how will you ensure that the African Continental Free Trade Area achieves its goals?
Excellences, messieurs les candidats, la question en langue française. L'Afrique a tout ce dont elle a besoin pour nourrir sa population, éduquer ses enfants et prendre soin de leur santé. Mais la réalité défie cela. Comment allez-vous transformer la richesse en ressources du continent en avantages tangibles, réduire la dette, assurer un financement durable pour l'Union africaine et permettre à l'Afrique de contrôler son destin économique? En outre, comment allez-vous garantir que la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine atteigne ses objectifs? Et on commence avec le premier candidat de Madagascar. Excellence, vous avez 4 minutes pour y répondre.
This question that talks about the hopes, and the first hope is that is contained in Agenda 2063. And we are going to just try and respond to this question. Perhaps not answer it completely, because you can't answer it in just 4 minutes. You can't show academically what it is that we can do in order to respond to this aspiration. So aspiration 1 of Agenda 2063 is as follows: a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Your question is huge. How can a chairperson of the African Union Commission, with a very clear terms of responsibility, about 26 of those, and first of all, he or she has demonstrated leadership characteristics, has to have administrative capacity, has to know protocol, has to be diplomatic. How can such a chairperson respond to such a huge question? I am an economist. I am a finance person by training. I do have some ideas to share. First of all, I can emphasize the importance of continuing to develop the economy at the continental level. You did mention our joint initiative about developing trade through, in theory, liberalization of trade, liberalization of the circulation of persons throughout our continent. In theory, I say trade can effectively become a source of economic dynamism. I think I understand that we're at about 12.6% of commercial trade between African countries. This is very low. For a continent such as Europe, a continent such as America, they go up to more than 50%. So what we need to do is to continue to continue with the efforts that you're doing. There's already a secretariat at the ICFTA. A secretariat, the ICFTA is just a geographical zone. It is the geographical zone. We haven't yet attained this free circulation of trade. But if we manage to ensure that a free trade can happen and can happen very quickly, it is very possible that we shall triple our performance in economic development. I am a farmer. I have a fish and chickens, and at a very small scale, and I support young farmers. And it's very difficult to pretend that one can have a good quality and one can sell the products to the neighbors. People are not able to really exhaust what is available in the market. But free trade is that. It is to learn how to master capital virtues, capitalism. Where do you find money, and what am I going to do to find the money? I think we need to start modestly. We need to start at the level of the local development, so that slowly by slowly, with support from the government and of course the support of the African Union, we shall then at the end ensure that all of the citizens, young, medium-aged, and especially women, can have the opportunity of participating in this large continental market. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Now I hand over the floor to you, Excellency Raila Odinga, first for your answer. 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Africa is, of course, the least developed continent by comparison. Look at economic statistics. But this is because there are historical reasons why Africa is where it is today. And we will say that Africa does not need to remain here. We need to develop Africa. There are several factors which work against Africa. For example, the international financial infrastructure has worked very much against Africa, because African countries have been made to borrow money at a very high rate of interest compared to other countries of the same status as African countries. So we need to address the issue of rearranging the international financial infrastructure. That is, I think, one of the major starting points. Now, Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth in terms of raw materials. But it's a paradox that Africa also is the poorest in terms of living conditions. We say that we need not remain for perpetually the source of raw materials for industrial west or east. That we need to do value addition to raw materials which are coming out of Africa before we export them. And then we've also said that Africa needs to trade more with itself. There's big potential. The African Development Bank today says that 7 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in this year are going to be African countries. That are much higher than Europe. We're only competing with Asia. So it is important that Africa enhances the trade with itself. The inter-African trade today stands at just mere 15%. Now we have the African Free Trade Area organization that was launched now 3 years ago, but not much has been achieved. Some of the reasons are issues that are actually solvable. The non-tariff barriers to trade that have been imposed by respective African countries. Things like standards, which are different from one country to the other country, making it difficult for goods to move freely across the borders. Then modalities of payment. And then the other issue of infrastructure. I worked for 5 years as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure Development. And here is another problem, because goods cannot move freely because of lack of adequate infrastructure within the continent. Kenya exported tea to Ghana, and it took 6 months, 3 months of tea to travel from Kenya to Ghana. We have major infrastructure projects, the high-speed continental railway, the inter-African highways, Cape to Cairo, Tunis to Cape, Dakar to Djibouti, Dakar, Lagos, Mombasa, and so on and so forth. All these need to be developed. Energy is another factor. Energy is too expensive, but we can reduce the cost of energy and go green the continent.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya est à présent, mesdames et messieurs.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti. When you talk about the riches of Africa, we often think about natural resources, and the riches of Africa begins with its people. We have 1.4 billion inhabitants on the continent, and more than 60% of this population is young between 0 and 25 years. The first wealth of this continent is in its people. We must have the capacity to think about how we can ensure that these people, this population, can benefit not only from the existing wealth, but also add value to that wealth. How can we go about that? Through universal education, quality education in our countries. We should have the capacity of offering our citizens a free education from the primary to the university levels, and ensure that this education is spread in all over the regions of our continent and of our country. We must remove the obstacles to education. The feminine population represents 50.2%. There are still cultural obstacles. There are obstacles to the education of girls. We must concentrate on valorizing our human resources. And then we have fertile land. What are we doing with this fertile land? We are still in many countries using very archaic agriculture. It is time to begin to develop an agriculture that I would call modern. It does exist in many countries. Look, for example, at a country such as Rwanda. Tea and coffee are actually, there's value added locally. Countries such as Ghana, countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, cocoa is transformed locally. Now, these raw products that we sell without adding value, we must be able to add value locally so that we can increase the wealth and also create employment. The transformation of agricultural products is a priority. So today, agriculture in many countries uses biotechnology. It uses the drip system. It uses seeds that are modified, that are quality seeds. Ethiopia uses quality seeds in order to be able to produce maize. Today, Ethiopia produces maize and wheat because of these seeds that are quality seeds. It is important to think about transforming agricultural product in place that will ensure that the people can get out of food insecurity, ensure that there is a specialized agriculture. There has to be areas of specialized agriculture, and that, I would say, is one of the steps that will lead to ensuring that this world there can be at the benefit of the population. And then we come to natural resources. I acknowledge the work by President Museveni. He has said that he will not export petrol or gas as long as there will not be a refinery in Uganda. These are the examples from African leaders who take the destiny of the people in hand so that they can actually have value added locally. Now, trade, everybody knows that it is through trade that development happens. Look at China. China And all over the Chinese economy really targets production and exportation. When you add value to our products, we can become exporters. Let me talk about tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. That is not the problem. I think that the situation must be to, first of all, protect our wealth by transforming them locally. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf.
Of round one, where I'm happy to announce we have a 5-minute break. And after this break, we come to round two. You have been tuned in to us here from the African Union headquarters here in Addis Ababa, and we are bringing to you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024 with our 3 esteemed candidates vying for the position of chairperson of the African Union.
Merci infiniment, chers candidats, d'avoir répondu à la première question du premier round. Mesdames et messieurs, il reste encore 3 rounds auxquels vont participer les candidats et on va marquer tout de suite une courte pause de 5 minutes. On revient juste après. Merci beaucoup de nous prêter attention.
The right to proper health care, good food and nutrition. African countries, in the implementation of their national priorities under Agenda 2063, have made commitments to eradicate poverty in our generation, build inclusive and sustainable economies with shared prosperity for all, through social and economic transformation by focusing on the following areas. Sustainable and inclusive economic growth that reduces poverty and leads to increased income levels. Equality and decent jobs. Value addition in agricultural products and growth of agro-business and industries. Human capital development. Skills revolution in science, technology and innovation. Gender development, youth empowerment and employment generation for youth and women. Social security and protection for all people and infrastructural development. Good governance supported by capable institutions. Manufacturing-based industrialization. Promotion of culture, arts and sports. Peace and security. Let us unite to build the Africa we want.
Of the continent. Come with me as we explore what's about to unfold. Candidates are in the running for the prestigious role of chairperson of the African Union Commission. Let me introduce them to you. The first candidate, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Randria Mandrato, Madagascar. And now let's take a deeper look into their profiles. To debate their vision for the future of Africa. Watch the AU Commission Chairperson debates live on EVC exclusively on this.
Second round of question starters. Let me just come in and you have seen the first question was actually how do you transform the national wealth of the continent, like individually the member states, to a continental prosperity together with reducing debt, also enabling to control the economic growth destination of the countries or the continent, and also achieving the African continental free trade area goals. So with all this, how do you transform the national wealth to a continental prosperity? And each of them have given their chances. I can reflect. I have my view, my reflection. I have listened to all of them. Maybe later on, put your questions in the comment section. So now the second question is going to be read. So let me just go out.
Mahamadou Ali Youssouf, ministre des Affaires étrangères du Djibouti, Excellence Monsieur Raila Amolo Odinga, ancien Premier ministre du Kenya, enfin Excellence Monsieur Richard Randriamandrato, ancien ministre des Affaires Madagascar, pardon. Et on revient tout de suite pour le deuxième round, Anita.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Anita.
about to start the round 2 of our debate here in Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate, where we are witnessing and listening to 3 esteemed candidates, each vying for the chairperson position of the African Union Commission. Earlier on, we heard their thoughts on issues such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, and now we're moving into the second round. And if you're just joining us, we're beaming live from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa to be specific.
Et pour ouvrir le deuxième round, mesdames et messieurs, honorables assistances, nous allons également ouvrir une deuxième enveloppe pour découvrir la question qui a été préparée par le panel indépendant pour ce débat. Je rappelle également, mesdames et messieurs, que les questions sont rédigées dans les 2 langues, la langue française, ensuite la langue anglaise. Alors, Excellence, chers candidats, votre question est la suivante.
Is this
Malgré
in spite of the hopes of the African Union to silence the arms between now and 2030, the conflicts continue to take place. How would you go about proposing African solutions so that you can ensure that there is a prevention, management, and a resolution that are effective and sustainable of conflicts? And how would you accelerate the advance of Africa towards a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council? That's your question.
The AU's aspiration to silence guns by 2020, conflicts persist. How will you foster African solutions to ensure effective and durable conflict prevention, management, and resolution? And how do you plan to accelerate Africa's push for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council? Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed candidates, the first to answer this round of questions will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga. You have 4 minutes, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Well, silencing the guns on the continent. As you know that in 2013, the AU met and passed a resolution to silence the guns by 2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. We need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that our African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example, in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, there's some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment of dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most parts of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected. If the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this, I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya. Et maintenant, mesdames et messieurs.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf.
That Silencing the Guns is a flagship program, one of the 15 that our leaders have endorsed years ago. And then they put a number of mechanisms and structure around this flagship program so that peace becomes a reality on our continent. The first structure is the African Peace and Security Architecture. And then we have the strategy that we all know, Silencing the Guns. And to support this strategy, the African Union put in place a number of mechanisms. One of them is the Peace and Security Council. The other one is the Committee of Elders, the Committee of Chief of Staff. We have the Peace Fund, and we can rely on every kind of mechanism. So why is peace is not, let's say, a reality on the ground on our continent? There are a number of reasons. One of them is the political will of countries. We have to be outspoken and frank. We make decisions at the Peace and Security Council level. These decisions are not implemented. Our Peace and Security Council is not proactive. It is reacting to crises when they occur and happen. This has to change. And I'm sending a message to our member countries saying this has to change. The number 2 problem that we have to face is our standby forces. We have them on the papers. Of course, sometimes we can mobilize them, but they lack resources. We are still relying on foreign partnership for our resources. Let me give you an example. ATMIS. Since 2007, ATMIS has been financed by the European Union and the United Nations, up to 2.7 billion euros. Now, financial resources are critical. Why should we have the money so that we can operate on crisis ground on the continent? Because without money, we cannot deploy our standby forces. Without money, even the committee of mediators cannot go and discuss with the stakeholders. They sometimes wait for the tickets, the per diems, days and days and days. It's very critical that the Peace Fund, in which we have $400 million, that the Commission and the PRC, get to the compromise situation where that money could be used for peace on the continent. So far, only the interest of the 400 millions are used. And I'm really shameful when I say, DRC have been given 1 million for peace, issues through this fund. And they have given to, I don't know, another country 1.5 million. It has to change. We need the authority from the member countries so that we can use this money, the $400 million, to keep peace on our continent. There are so many other bottlenecks that needs to be handled very quickly. But money is one of them. The Peace and Security Council mission is the second problem. And then we have a third one. This one also has to be underlined very seriously. When a crisis happens, I give you the example of Somalia. I've been around for some time. I've been dealing with this problem for many years. When there is no unity of purpose between the countries around this country, neighboring countries, this country will never stand on its feet. That's what we are experiencing today in the Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions displaced. Neighboring countries are still fighting on the Sudan, and the African Union and IGAD are watching.
Sorry, sir, your time is up.
Okay, sorry, because I can talk hours about this issue.
No problem, sir. Thank you so much for your contribution. And ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, especially to our esteemed candidates, if you go beyond the time, I will be forced to interrupt, and I don't want to do that, so please forgive me. May we kindly have our last candidate, His Excellency Randir Mandrato, to respond to the question. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Faire taire les armes et
Silencing the guns and issues relating to peace and security in general actually are due to so many things. It's not like turning on a switch or switching it off, not on and off a switch. No, there are several factors that have to be taken into consideration, and that is the reason why the African continent and the African Union have been challenges to silence the guns. But we have to resolve our conflicts peacefully. And this is one of the principles of the African Union, just like the principle of non-interference. So this is an aspect that we all have to actually look at. When exactly do we talk about non-interference or non-indifference, and how do we use them to silence the guns? But that is the situation in which we find ourselves in. And if I am chosen by the heads of state and government as chairperson of the commission, I will make sure that the African Union Commission would actually work towards resolving our conflicts peacefully, because we have that in the Constitutive Act of Africa, of the African Union. So we have the Peace and Security Council, we have the Peace Architecture of the African Union, but we also have the United Nations Security Council. And then bilaterally, we've got efforts that are underway, and we've heard about progress in some areas, in some regions where we have long-standing conflicts. And then we also have the opportunity of ensuring that there is solidarity with the United Nations, the African Union and the United Nations. This is a framework that could actually enable us to sit down with the international community and talk about crisis in Africa. Why should we only talk about the crisis in Ukraine? Why not talk about the crisis in Sudan and crisis in other African countries? So we are talking about financing peace missions, but there is also a program that actually wants to see the program of the United Nations, that is the SDGs, aligned with Agenda 2063. And then we also have the 10-year plan of our public institutions in charge of working at a national level, but we are talking about the justice systems in our respective countries. Now, concerning the two permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, I think here in Africa, we all know the importance and the urgency of having these two seats. And we have to seize this opportunity because we are actually at the end of 2024. And so we have to act very fast in 2025. And we actually, this should be the mantra of the African Union in 2025. And so, of course, we have to make sure that we can actually speak with one voice on the choice of who will represent Africa on the United Nations Security Council. It's not going to be easy. It will be up to the heads of states to decide who will be the continent's representative. And I will conclude to say that, like this morning, I read in the newspapers the issue, the problem between Ethiopia and Somalia. And this was being resolved by Turkey. The mediator is Turkey. Let us be responsible. Let us be serious. The African Union should be that person doing the mediation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, candidate from Madagascar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our second round. And without any transition, we are going to step into the third round, and we are going to discover.
Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move into the third round. Once again, if you're just joining us, these questions have been formulated by an independent panel, and the questions will be open and seen only at the beginning of the round, as I'm doing right now. Esteemed candidates, on the topic of reviving Pan-Africanism and countering external influence, Pan-Africanism is declining, and external powers and internal divisions challenge Africa's integration efforts. What specific steps will you take to rekindle the spirit of Pan-Africanism, counter big power politics on the continent, mobilize African countries behind a common integration agenda, ensure resource self-reliance, and position regional economic communities at the center of this process?
Cher candidat, votre question est la suivante. Le panafricanisme est en déclin et les puissances extérieures et les divisions internes remettent en cause les efforts d'intégration en Afrique. Quelles mesures spécifiques comptez-vous prendre pour raviver l'esprit du panafricanisme contre la politique des grandes puissances sur le continent, mobiliser les pays africains derrière un programme d'intégration commun, assurer l'autonomie en matière de ressources et positionner également les communautés économiques régionales au centre de ce processus? Et nous allons commencer tout de suite avec le candidat de Djibouti pour y répondre. Vous avez également 4 minutes, monsieur.
D'abord, il faut comprendre que nous
First and
vivons
foremost,
dans
we
un
have
monde
to
qui
understand
est
that
en
we
train
are
de se
living
multipolariser.
in a world which is
Ce
multipolarized
monde qui est en train
world.
de se
This is a
multipolariser
world that is actually
ne fera pas
multipolarized,
de place
and this
aux
world
pays,
would
aux
not
continents
provide space
qui n'auront
for
pas
a
l'économie
continent or
nécessaire,
countries that do not
les
have
forces
the
militaires
right
nécessaires, la
economies,
capacité
the
militaire
military
nécessaire,
strength,
et
the
surtout,
capacity
je
that is
dirais, une
required,
présence
and
sur la scène
mostly
internationale
that continent
qui
or
lui
country
donne le
that is
droit à sa
not
place.
on the world
C'est une
stage.
réalité.
This is a
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut
reality.
faire?
So what can we do?
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire?
What should we
Je pense
do?
qu'il est très
I
important
think it
que
is
le
clearly,
Global
it is
Sud
very important that the global
puisse se
south
positionner.
should
Et
actually
dans le
take
Global Sud,
action. And in the
c'est
global
l'Afrique qui
south,
doit se
it is
positionner.
Africa that
L'Afrique se
actually has to
positionnera
stand
comment?
out. And how is
Quand
Africa
vous
going
ne
to stand out?
représentez pas
If you do
grand-chose
not
sur la scène
if you do not
internationale en matière de commerce,
represent much in terms of global trade,
vous ne pouvez pas
you cannot.
prendre une place
You
autour de la
cannot
table
actually
où se
sit
décide
around the
le
table
destin du monde.
where decisions are being
Donc,
taken for the destiny of the
l'intégration
world.
est,
And so
je dirais,
integration is, I would
quelque chose
say,
d'obligatoire. Quand on parle
an
de l'intégration,
obligation is a
il
must.
est
When we
important
talk about
que
obligation, it is
je
important
dirais, la ZLECA
that
puisse être
the
fonctionnelle. Il
AFCFTA
est très
should
important
actually
que le
be
commerce
functional. It is
intra-africain soit
important that
développé et
intra-African
aille
trade
au-dessus de
be
18%.
developed,
Il est très
and it should
important
go
que
beyond
les États africains
18%.
puissent
It is
utiliser leur
important that
richesse
African countries
comme moyen
should
de
actually
pression.
use their own
Maintenant,
resources.
l'Afrique a eu sa
And
place au
so
G20.
Africa has now a
Nous
seat,
félicitons
and the
l'Afrique du Sud
G20
qui va
table. We
présider,
want to
n'est-ce pas, le
congratulate
G20 l'année prochaine.
South Africa for
Aujourd'hui, la
chairing
Commission est présente au
the
G20.
G20
Donc, il est
next
très
year.
important
And so it is
que
important
la Commission qui
that
va venir
the African
puisse
Union
travailler
Commission
main
should
dans
be
la main avec
working
l'Afrique du Sud
hand in
pour que
hand
l'agenda
with
de
the
l'Afrique
African
soit
Union to
positionné en tête de
actually
l'agenda.
make sure
Ce n'est
that
pas
Agenda
suffisant.
2063
Tout à l'heure, je
is
n'ai pas répondu parce que je n'avais pas assez
a
de temps pour le
priority
Conseil de sécurité.
item on the
Je crois que l'Afrique,
agenda
il
of
faut
Agenda
redresser cette
2063
injustice historique qui s'est
of
passée.
the
Il faut que l'Afrique
G20.
soit au Conseil de
Africa
sécurité
has to be
pour que l'Afrique
also
fasse entendre sa voix.
on the
Imaginez-vous
UN Security Council.
80% des
Just
dossiers qui
imagine
sont traités au Conseil de sécurité
80%
sont
of
des
the
dossiers
issues
africains.
discussed at
Quand
the
on parle
UN
des changements
Security Council
climatiques, qui
is
est la
African
première victime
problems. When we
dans le
talk
monde?
about
Il y a quelques mois, la
security
Zambie, le
issues,
Botswana,
who do we talk
ainsi
about?
que
Africa.
le Zimbabwe ont
We
subi
have,
des sécheresses terribles.
when we talk about food insecurity,
Et la
we
même
also hear
période en Afrique
Africa,
de l'Est,
Zimbabwe,
l'Éthiopie, le
Botswana,
Kenya, la
Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, they have actually been victims of natural disasters, but we are not the ones polluting the world. So the African Union should also be fully involved in the COP discussions. The COP discussions should also be held here in Africa. So a strong Africa has to be an Africa that is present on the global stage. We have to see that Africa has to be part and parcel of the global south, and this is what we have to do. And I'm going to make sure that our commission is going to work to ensure that Africa is part of the global south. Integration is a long-winded effort. It goes through solidarity. We are not working among ourselves. We are not speaking to one another as neighbors. We'd rather trade with non-African countries because we have non-tariff barriers, because our currencies are not convertible. Our currencies are not convertible. If I want to trade in birr with Ethiopia, and Ethiopia wants to trade in francs, definitely there is loss of money. So we should have a payment and compensation system in Africa. We have to mobilize resources between 5 and 10 billion so that this compensation system is functional. Are we going to have a single currency in Africa? Why not? That is possible.
And now I give the floor to Her Excellency Randy Mandrato. It's your turn, sir. 4 minutes.
Well, I do not think that Pan-Africanism is actually dying out. No, because Pan-Africanism is in us. We are Pan-Africanists. You cannot erase the history of this continent, the history which also includes the efforts of our diaspora. So Pan-Africanism is really not dying in Africa. It is true that we all have a huge responsibility. The current generation that we have to work to make sure that the future generation should not forget what our founding fathers actually had in mind when they were establishing the OAU. So that all those who are in Africa should continue to live the same dream the same dream. We inherited this continent from our founding fathers, and we have the Africa that we want. The Africa that we see is the Africa where we live in, and the Africa that we want is the Africa that we want to prepare, and which we must prepare. And so there is a clear difference between the Africa in which we are and the African Union, which is our own home, the common house. And if the African Union Commission does not put in the right resources, the human resources and the financial resources, even the diplomats and the military, we will not get to where we want to be. And so I am of the opinion that it all depends on the will of the people to go beyond the challenges that we face today. We all know the problems of our African Union today. There are certain aspects that do not meet the expectations of the people. For example, the SACA audit that was prepared by experts proposing reforms that have to be undertaken. We also have reforms that were undertaken in 2016. So we need to undertake those reforms to ensure that the African Union can actually rise to the challenges. The regional economic communities also have a role to play. I went to COMESA for several years and actually saw the efforts undertaken by countries of COMESA and East Africa. And we see Tunisia, Egypt in COMESA as well. And this will continue. We have the Abuja Treaty actually defined gradual integration at the regional level and then the continental level. And I know we will get there. And I am going to work with the members of the next commission so that together we can actually make all of this easy. And lastly, I think we should also bear in mind, we should also think about the military bases, the foreign military bases in Africa. in African countries. Some countries have already started to take their own destiny in their hands in terms of their security. We should be brave enough. We should actually have that courage to make sure that we can actually stand out there as adults that can actually take their destiny in their own hands. Foreign military bases in Africa, we do hope that in a few years' time, those military bases will be a thing of the past, because this military base is actually a source of conflict. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellency Randra Mandriato, candidate of Madagascar. Now we listen to Raila Amolo Odinga, candidate of Kenya.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there's cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor. Secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet and using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Raila Odinga, finishing us on the third round. And now we move into the fourth and final round, and I give my sister the opportunity to open the envelope and tell us what the first or the last question rather is. And ladies and gentlemen, as a form of a reminder, after this we have a quick break, and after the break each of our esteemed candidates will have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks. Fatima?
Chers candidats, votre question est la suivante. La mise en œuvre des réformes clés de l'Union africaine décidées par la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement est au point mort, ce qui a un impact négatif sur sa viabilité structurelle et sur sa viabilité financière et sur la concentration de l'Union africaine sur quelques biens publics à fort impact. Si vous devenez président, quelles nouvelles approches introduirez-vous pour redynamiser la mise en œuvre de ces réformes, rationaliser le programme de l'Union africaine et renforcer son efficacité à long terme?
In the long term.
Under the topic of implementing of reforms agreed under the Assembly Decision 635, the implementation of key African Union reforms decided by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments has stalled, with an adverse impact on its structural viability and financial sustainability, and the AU's focus on a few high-impact public goods. If you become chairperson, what new approaches will you introduce to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, streamline the AU's agenda, and strengthen its long-term effectiveness?
Et j'invite à présent le candidat de
Madagascar to respond first. First of all, we have to begin by bringing back order to our shared home, the African Union. I think this is the highest priority. The mandate of the chairperson of the commission as a whole is lasts 4 years. So that is a very short period of time to be able to change it from top to bottom. What needs to be changed in terms of institutional reforms of the African Union. So one must begin by bringing back order. I did mention a short while ago the recommendations of the SACA audit. I also mentioned the reforms that have already been proposed in 2016. There will be other reforms. And what needs to be done were I to become the chairperson of the union would be to review the documents. And one cannot forget history. One cannot ignore history. I don't think we could. We are at the end of a process. So we are at the beginning of a new process, and the outgoing team did what they were able to do with the resources that they had at their disposal. And I would like to thank the outgoing chairperson of the commission, Mr. Faki, and his entire team. And were I to be elected chairperson of the commission, I would work, of course, with the chairperson because it would be a lady chairperson. Now, these reforms have to be prioritized. There are reforms at the level of the financing of the African Union. There are reforms in terms of mobilization of strategic partnerships. There are, of course, issues that have to do with the effectiveness in the area of peace and security. So we have to prioritize the reforms. Yet, once again, 4 years is too short a period of time. It is therefore important to review objective by objective. Strategic objective is what I mean of the 10-year plan 2024-2032. And since it was my responsibility in COMESA, one can perhaps plan for strategic planning over perhaps 2-3 years, which strategic planning would make it possible for us to identify the urgent issues and to align the financing of these issues. The 10-year plan does not allow one to do this. And maybe were we to have a strategic plan, we could perhaps be more specific and address the matters that need to be addressed urgently in the way of reforms. And I also think, as I said a short while ago, that the organs of the African Union, beginning with the Conference of Heads of State and Government, but also the committee of the PRC, the Permanent Representatives Committee with the Pan-African Parliament and the other organs, all the organs of the African Union should agree on the speed they should work at, so that at the end of the day the reforms become visible, become tangible, and that the citizens of the continent can appreciate the effectiveness of a new the effectiveness of the new African Union led by a new team.
Thank you. And now I yield the microphone to you, Excellency Raila Odinga. 4 minutes, sir.
Well, we know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now, there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Paki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge. But look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as high rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in sovereign funds, from which the AU can actually borrow without having to pay so much high interest. And this will help AU actually to spearhead the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African Railway Network, Lagos to Cairo, the high speed. Then you have got Beira in Mozambique to Lobito in Angola and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the Lapset, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Kribi in Cameroon, to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue. And we have the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change in the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people. And then visas, to do with visas are a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
Just
minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
We are going now to listen to the response from the last candidate for this round, the candidate from Djibouti.
Let me start by paying tribute to our heads of states who have endorsed those reforms in 2017. And then the champion for those reforms was His Excellency President Kagame, and he passed the responsibility to President Ruto. Now, there are a number of reforms that have already been implemented. We have to recognize that. The size of the commission, we had 10 commissioners, chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 8 commissioners, and it has been reduced. We have what we call a golden rule in terms of managing the staff and the personnel. I'm still waiting for the SACA program to be implemented. I hope that this hot potato will not wait for us, one of us, when we'll be elected. But I hope that the SACA process will be implemented. It is about the personnel, the staff. We have moved from a lot of short contract employees to a permanent contract. That's very important. If you want to create loyalty, you want to create the ownership within your staff and personnel, you have to make them happy. They need to have a permanent contract, and it is in the SACA program. Now, the biggest bottleneck of the reforms is the financing. Our heads of state said we will pay 0.2% of eligible import to the Commission. Only 17 countries, 17, are applying and abiding by that rule. It has to change. I'm not going to impose that on our leaders. It's not my intention, but I will advocate for it. It's very important to have, that particular issue of mobilizing and fostering financing be resolved immediately. Then our experts, there is a unit in the African Union Commission called the Reform Unit, led by Mr. Makoko, a very able African expert. But there are so many reforms that have not been implemented. One of them is PAP, the Pan-African Parliament. It's still a consultative organ. When is the Pan-African Parliament will become a legislative organ? They have passed in 2014 a protocol. Only 15 countries ratified that protocol. And this is one of the major reforms that we have to implement. Then we have on the judicial sector, the Court of Justice, the Commission of Human Rights. Sometimes they are fighting on issues. The Court of Justice do not open its doors to nationals, to African citizens, to NGOs. They are complaining. I am hearing complaints about the African citizens with regard to the Court of Justice. And then they are fighting who is doing what, the Commission of Human Rights. These reforms have to be implemented. And the Bureau of Liaison, a liaison bureau. We have so many on the continent. That's double use of those bureaus. Time is running, time is flying. So we have to rationalize. How can you imagine that you have 3 bureaus in the same region? And we're saying we should have the golden rules for management. And whenever we want to touch one of the bureaus, it's a political matter. It's useless, but it is a political matter. The country that is hosting the bureau is saying, you won't touch it. It has to change. It needs leadership. It needs understanding, negotiation, but it has to change. If we want to change things, we have to be frank and outspoken. We have to be, really tough when it comes to be tough, and lean when it comes to it. We have to do it. We have to do it.
Yes, sir, your time is up. And now, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of round 4. If you are just joining us, we've had 4 rounds, and each of them has touched on a thematic area. And now we will go for a quick break. When we come back, the candidates each have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous remercions bien sûr nos chers candidats d'avoir répondu à la dernière question du 4e round de ce débat de Mjadala Africa, débat sur le leadership de l'Union africaine. Merci beaucoup de rester avec nous. On va se retrouver dans quelques instants. Nous allons marquer une autre courte pause et après la pause, chaque candidat aura 2 minutes pour le mot de clôture. À tout de suite.
a city of transformation and beauty. This week, the city will host a pivotal event that could shape the future of the continent. Come with me as we explore what's about to unfold.
So, yeah, we have listened to the 4 questions and the candidates have responded. View, I think Raila Odinga has tackled better than the Djibouti and the Madagascar candidate because he talked about, first of all, the historical the reasons why Africa, although it is rich, but remained the way it is poor. So what he said is basically our natural resources, the raw materials that are leaving from the continent, we should be able to add values on them before exporting, meaning to have those refineries, manufacturing plants in those countries. And he said also to boost intra-trade amongst African countries, which is also important. So these are, mind you, these are the answers, how to translate national wealth to continental prosperity, with also reducing debt, enabling, to control, enabling the continent to control its economic destiny, and also achieving African continental free trade area goals. So for this is why he's saying, to add value before exporting, to boost intra-trade amongst African countries, and to improve also for the African continental trade, to improve the modalities of payment, the unnecessary tariffs that are imposed by individual member states, and also to improve the infrastructure so that will easily facilitate the intra-trade amongst African countries. So I think he tackled it better than the others. The Madagascar has talked about the inclusive growth, about Agenda 2063. But, like when it is really, for me at least, that's how it sounds, precise to the detail, specific, then I think it's better than, to hear how that candidate is going to tackle that specific problem. And he was talking about, for example, Raila Odinga. Again, my focus is on him on question 1, how Kenya's export of tea to Ghana has taken 3 months. Imagine 3 months. Okay, so that's one thing. So, but if we have that, whether it's a road infrastructure or a railway, then it would have been much better. The Djibouti candidate, he talked about the population of the continent, the number of population, the young people, and to educate how to make these people beneficiary out of their natural resources of the continent. And he talked about also to be able to use fertile land. I mean, I kind of lost the connection to the question how he tackled, he raised the population of the continent and also the fertile land. I understand, okay, agriculture is important, using quality seeds to be able to feed the people. And then he talked about also natural resources, not selling raw materials, but then I think time has stopped. Time was a constraint, so he couldn't continue. So the thing is that, I mean, my only question is, which is to all of them, like, are you going to force? I mean, still the main question is not tackled. I think the African Union Commission, the chairperson, should be given more power, the African Union itself. Otherwise, you talk about, you say that, okay, you will do this, you will do that. But if the member states do not give you the power, then that institute is again powerless, toothless. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to the main studio because they are back to give their closing remarks. Each of them will get 2 minutes.
Is in your hands and that you are actively involved in doing this together. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to our last session. My name is Anita Erskine, and I'm joined here by my colleague Fatima Sharif, who is our French speaker.
Merci beaucoup Anita, mesdames et messieurs. Merci encore une fois de vous joindre à nous pour la dernière ligne droite du débat de Mjadala Africa, débat sur le leadership de l'Union africaine. Vous avez pu suivre au courant du débat les questions qui ont été posées, les réponses données par les différents candidats et on arrive pratiquement au terme du débat. Alors, Anita, nous allons donner bien sûr le mot de clôture aux candidats tout de suite.
Absolument. Merci beaucoup, Fatima. And now to our three candidates, you each have 2 minutes to share your closing remarks, or better still, your last words. We will start this round with His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. I am delighted to have had the opportunity to address our people of Africa. And as I've said, I am ready to work for Africa. There are reforms that will be necessary so that AU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its money work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries can pay their dues to the Union. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. We can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent. And this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. The African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium. 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm really sorry to interrupt you once again, but these are the rules of the debate. Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et
We are going now, ladies and gentlemen, give 2 minutes to the candidate of Djibouti closing remarks.
يعني أن ننطق ببعض الكلمات باللغة العربية. اسمحوا لي أن أختتم هذه المناظرة برجاء.
Thank you so much, and let me speak in Arabic. I would like to say that if I will be elected as the chair of the African Union Commission, I will be up to your aspirations and I will defend the interests of our continent, and I will work diligently to defend our continent, and with the full modesty, I think that I deserve it.
So I wish for our African people, our countries, a very happy 2025.
Africans tonight, I wish to all African nations and citizens all the best. Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now 2 minutes for you, His Excellency Richard J. Randemandrato.
En 2025,
in 2025, there will be a new team that will be leading for 4 years. Will be leading the African Union Commission for 4 years, and there shall be 8 high-level public servants like most of us, and we shall be the ones to continue with the reforms. We shall be a united team, a team that will have the team spirit to continue in the implementation of the 10-year plan of Agenda 2063. I do regret that this evening we're not able to handle subjects that are so urgent because we did not have enough time. Issues such as public health, the debt, issues of financing and financial institutions of the African Union, questions that have to do with the participation of the civil society and the diaspora, the questions that are linked to information and digital technology. I'm sorry we didn't have time to deal with those issues, but on another, we shall have other opportunities and I shall be able to make my modest contribution. Like in public sport, there have to be players and they have to be those who choose, who select the players, those who select the heads of state. It is up to them to select the team that will lead the African Union Commission. For their need, we need a leader. Men and women need a leader, and I hope that in 2025, the wisdom of heads of state and government will balance the team that will win, so that the Africa that we want can continue to win the battle for sustainable development. Thank you. Thank you very much for these closing remarks that have been made by the different candidates.
To our esteemed candidates, ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for our esteemed candidates. Tonight, we have heard from His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Foreign Affairs Minister Djibouti. We've also heard from His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya. We've also heard from His Excellency Richard J. Randemandrato, who is the former Foreign Affairs Minister of Madagascar. Each one of our candidates has done an exceptional job talking about the thematic areas that were set before them. We've talked about advancing economic integration. We've talked about promoting peace and security as well as democracy, Africa's place in global affairs, and reforming the African Union amongst many. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute honor bringing you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024.
Merci infiniment, Anita. Mesdames et messieurs, on arrive au terme du débat de Mjadala Africa en direct depuis le siège de la Commission de l'Union africaine à Addis Abeba. On a été ravis de vous accompagner pour la modération du débat. On souhaite bien sûr bonne chance aux différents candidats. L'élection du nouveau président se fera au niveau de la Commission de l'Union africaine. Elle aura lieu au mois de février prochain. Merci à toutes et à tous de nous avoir suivis et bonne fin de soirée.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and have a wonderful night.
የናሬሽን ፓወር ጅማሮ ደግሞ የኢቢሲን ብን
So yeah, with that, this debate of the African Union chairperson, those who are vying for the position of the African Union chairperson, has been concluded, and there were 4 questions that has been raised. The first one, I think I did reflect on it, and the second question was with regards to, in spite of, silencing the gun team of the African Union by 2020. I mean, even after 4 years passed, still the guns are not silent. There are conflicts here and there. So how do, that is one. So what is the resolution? How can we have African solution? How will you foster African solution to resolve conflicts in the continent? And together with this, in the second question, there are two questions. That's one about silencing the gun. The second one is how do you advance the quest of Africa to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council? So Odinga has tried to answer this. He was the one who started it, but he kind of, focused on preventing the conflict rather than solving it. So he tried to categorize it. There are some of them are caused by poverty, some of them are by ethnicity, externally promoted conflicts, meaning by a non-African actor. Some of them are from religion. That's the cause. And so this is so to prevent this, he said, preventing the conflict before it's happening. So the date that he gave, this is this was just it doesn't make sense, but he says that he by 2035 he hopes that the guns would be silent. I mean, I think he would rather have shut his mouth and not say any date, because this giving a date 10 years, 20 years, or 5 years is just playing with African people and not respecting African people. It's better to keep quiet and, at least to say things. What are the measures to really urgently apply an African solution that would ultimately lead us to silence the guns? That's one. With regards to the UN Security Council seat, he said it's fair for Africa to get two permanent seats. Even Europe has 3. So that's what he said. The Djibouti one, here, I think I believe that, for me, the way I listened to the Djiboutian candidate, he was like all over the place. I don't know, he did not really tackle the question. He said silencing the gun was one of the flagship programs, and this can be achieved through the peace and security program. Okay, that's good. Also, there is a committee of elders and standby forces of Africa. So he said for them to be able to get a fund from the African Union, because this was financed. For example, he gave the example of the peacekeeping mission in Somalia, which was AMISOM and ATMIS since 2007, just changing names, and now ATMIS has come to an end. So those were around 2.7 billion euro, and that was financed by the European Union and others, by non-African actors. And there's also a peace fund of the African Union. I think he tackled it good. Let me change my word with that. I mean, I take it back what I said. He tackled it. But for me, the difference was he focused on resolving the conflict, after it happened, when the conflict is there, rather than preventing it. So he also mentioned the African Union Peace Fund, which currently it has $400 million, but countries who have conflict are not really accessing the fund. For example, he said for DRC, it was only given $1 million. And what do they do with $1 million with a peacekeeping mission? Okay, we always say, when the external powers fund the peacekeeping missions, they have their own invested interest. But if we do not finance it, then how can we talk about, somebody has to fund it and has to bring a peacekeeping mission, okay? So he said countries should get enough money from that peace fund. And he mentioned also one other country who got $1.25 million for peacekeeping mission, again from the $400 million of the peace fund in the African Union, which he is arguing this candidate from Djibouti is arguing this is not enough again. So countries should get enough money. And the other is he mentioned the lack of unity of purpose by the neighboring countries where the conflict is happening. For example, he mentioned Sudan. So the neighboring countries should come to a unity of purpose and, you know, try to achieve that peace in Sudan or other countries. He kind of finished his 4-minute time without really tackling the question of how to advance the quest of Africa in the United Nations Security Council. So he did not answer them. The Madagascar one, silencing the gun, again, he also mentioned like the Djibouti using peace and security. But like specifically how, that is not really answered. And the peace and security architecture, to use the peace and security architecture and make sure the African Union Commission resolving conflict peacefully. But really how? I mean, don't you think that the African Union has been trying that, you know, using its Peace and Security Council and others trying to achieve peace? I mean, they have been trying, it didn't somehow. So you're supposed to come with your own plan or how you're going to change the approach. I didn't see that in this one. He talked about the United Nations Security Council. Also, yeah. And the other thing is that he said, yeah, like why the Africans are more talking about Ukraine as opposed to Sudan, for example, where conflict as opposed to DRC. So we have to talk about our own issues. I think that's what he's trying to say. Question 3 is reviving Pan-Africanism and countering external powers. They say because the spirit of Pan-Africanism is declining, and so what actions would you take? So this is a question presented to the candidates. What action would you take to rekindle Pan-Africanism, to counter external powers, mobilize Africans for a common agenda, and position the regional economic commissions, or the RECs? The Djibouti one, he said, he talked about, for example, you know, African Union being in G20 and South Africa now chairing it in 2025 for them to work together. I don't know why this has to do with, again, with reviving Pan-Africanism. And then also he talked about the Djibouti candidate integration, like trade with to boost the trade within African countries. And for example, he said, he tried to answer the United Nations Security Council seat in the African Continental Free Trade Area here, which the question was for question 2. So he was, I think, taking the opportunity. But again, he failed to answer what he's going to do to rekindle Pan-Africanism, to counter external powers, mobilize Africans for all this have not been answered. Madagascar said Pan-Africanism, he said, actually, I like his statement. He said, Pan-Africanism is in us, hence it's not dying in Africa. That's what he said. I believe so too. I agree with him. He said the future generation should not forget about what the founding fathers, their dream for the African unity, and this and that. But again, it lacks, okay, how are you going to make that dream be alive, in the next generations? You have to say, I mean, I always say, for me, you have to really incorporate this thing either in our academic curriculum or or it's not there, or we all as individuals have to make our own efforts to teach our children, or siblings or families. Each of us have to take this upon our own, like our own responsibility, but really to have that mechanism for the Pan-Africanism to rekindle that spirit, then there should be a mechanism, that is pushed by the African Union. And that is, I think, through education, to include it with education. He talked about also regional trade, and also, this is also one of my interests, my favorites. He said the military bases, the foreign military bases have to be removed. He did not mention them, but he said some countries are taking their own destiny in their own hands. He's referring to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, but he did not mention. He said, I mean, literally, he said we should have that courage. That's what he said. Well done for him. When it comes to Raila Odinga of Kenya, to answer how to rekindle Pan-Africanism, how to counter external powers, mobilize Africans for a common agenda, and this and that. He said, and then position the regional economic commissions with regards to trade. He talked about, currently, he said, African continental free trade area stands only 15%, the trade with Europe 70%, the trade with Asia 60%, or was it? Yeah, some part, or vice versa, something like that. So he said how to leapfrog. This should be, the topic we need to discuss, and, use that domestic market because it is available for Africa. He gave example of China, how once they liberalize their economy, that how the West rushed to have a manufacturing company in China, and China ultimately used that to elevate its people to middle class. Also create African market, and he talked about more really connectivity, whether it's by sea, road, to open our skies, and he really pictured or gave us an example how to connect, those for the seas, those for the road and for the railway, and then to open the skies. Then ultimately this will help also the landlocked countries in the continent. So he said, he basically said, this is his word: I want to be a vehicle to be used to bring that leapfrog change that is wanted for for the continent. The last question is that how to implement reforms that are introduced by different chairperson. For example, Faki Musa, or Musa Faki, he has been 8 years in that position, and he introduced reforms in his first term, but that has not been implemented due to lack of finance and some of it lack of administration. So that is the thing, and to achieve this, it started with the Madagascar. He said the African Union Commission, for example, mobilization of strategic objective in short period of time. It said it's not really doesn't work. More time should be given. I really don't agree with that, because I mean, it can be, the next person who is joining the office can also take it if it's really beneficial, and take it from there. Yeah, I mean, every time they want to leave their legacy, every time when we have new chairpersons, that, for example, Madame Zuma also have her own reform, like Agenda 2063 was introduced by her. Well, yeah, and then Faki Musa has his own. Everybody wants to leave their own legacy. I mean, if it's for the betterment of the African Union and, for the citizens, it's good. But I don't know. I doubt how much of that is true. Okay, in answering this, Odinga said issue of funding. The issue of funding is the main problem. So he said to use other alternatives. For example, the African Union, I mean, the member states are rich. The African Union can borrow actually from these resources. He talked about the Trans-African Railway, the Inga Dam, and this and that. I mean, also to open, most importantly, open visas for free movement of people. Djibouti said he recognized actually the reforms with regards to, you know, how to improve for African Union to finance itself. There was this program introduced by Paul Kagame, you know, for member states to have like some percentage of their tax to pay for the African Union contribution, so like 0% of their import tariff or something. Okay, so but that was not really. Only 17 countries have agreed out of this, and so that was not really. That makes you hopeful, you know. So in fact, Kagame, you know, is not in anymore in that position leading that program. Now it's William Ruto. I doubt if William Ruto has done anything. Also, the Djibouti candidate has talked about changing, for example, some of the organs, like the Pan-African Parliament. It's only a consultative organ, so to make it a legislative organ to improve the judicial sector, the laws and offices that are in different member states. I think each member states have a laws and office. Now this is like political. Also, he said some of those laws and offices are not really important. We can merge, for example, 3 of them that are located in the same region of the continent. But again, he said it takes a long way to convince the host of that country because this thing becomes really political. He said it looks like he has been part of it. These are the things, and they have added their concluding remarks, and that's how it's ended. Now, missing things, as the Ambassador Konjit, the Ethiopian, the veteran, the diplomat in the African Union, she said something important in the opening remarks, and she said she really regrets that there's no woman candidate, and that should be changed. I agree. Secondly, I also really people like Dr. Arikana Chiombori, who was ambassador of the African Union in the United States. Now, because she talked about France, she, you know, a letter of termination has been waiting on her table, or in a way pushed her to resign from her positions, just because she talked about France, what France is doing in the continent. So it was not allowed for a person in such position to talk about anything what France was doing in the continent. So she is one of, you know, the African women who have the capacity and the knowledge and everything to lead the African Union. And so she should have been part of this. And I'm sure there are also other women, but we have seen it in public talking and advocating for Africa. So that's why I'm mentioning her. Another thing is that, you know, they talk about, I will do this, I will do that, I will be a vehicle to do this. But the thing is, the African Union do not have the mandate, the power to change things. Power lies within the governments of the member states. That, you know, for African Union, they were copying actually how the European Union works and making it African Union. But what they did not want to change is that the European Union has a power more than the EU member states. So that power is not given to the African Union. They should give it. Then only the African Union can be, you know, powerful. So they did not talk about actually changing at least that attitude in the African Union. And nobody's daring to touch that. Perhaps that's what they are told by their governments when they were endorsed by their own governments not to touch that. I mean, don't you dare go there. I don't know, but nobody said it, and I find it very strange. Well, that's it, you know. Thank you very much again for tuning in. I want to address this. Somebody said that how can we, you know, why not we don't give up this this organization which is not a Pan-African? Well, I say that I don't agree with that. Me personally, it's the biggest Pan-African organization. We as citizens have an ownership to it. It's our the founding fathers are our ancestors, and we should make it work towards how we want it, not really giving up what and then establish another organization. No, I do not agree. We should make it, we should be able to mobilize and advocate and campaign for the African Union to work in a way that it can benefit its citizens. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much again for tuning in. Please go ahead and comment and let us know in the comment section what do you think of this session in the African Union, that them answering this question. What are any burning questions that's not answered by the candidates? Let us know in the comment section. And who is your choice? For who you would vote, or for who you can. I know that we citizens, African citizens, do not have the direct vote, but our countries, our governments have that power. So to which candidate you want your country to give its vote, please drop that name in the comment section. And yeah, have a good evening. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and share the video with others. Please support us through our PayPal account. Yeah, I want to give a shout out. We set up a goal for 1 hour to donate $6 and above, and then if you fulfill that, if the goal is achieved, for me to host a question and answer. I still hosted, question and answer by myself. But still, Osman Kone has donated $5. Thank you very much for that. Really, I appreciate it. And I encourage you, all of you, any amount will help the channel. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.